the Instant Speed Podcast, episode number 45. Our guests today will be Zach Bunn, Michael Hamilton, Logan Peterson, and David Rude. We're going to be talking about Blitz as a competitive format. Does it belong in Worlds? We'll be talking about that. But of course, the Instant Speed Podcast is always brought to you by Kayfabe Cards. Kayfabe Cards is the place to go for Flesh and Blood, but all your other trading card goods as well. You got to go to kayfabecards.com. I'm telling you, get all the tools you need to navigate the world of Wraith, and they'll get shipped right to your door. You don't have to move. You can just sit there, sip your coffee, enjoy some Seinfeld, get it done. Go to kayfabecards.com. That's www.kayfabecards.com. Let's get to the facts first, friends. And again, the topic du jour is that the World Championships will have a Blitz element. 5 rounds of Blitz are going to be what wrap up the Swiss rounds. Take it or leave it, but you guess you got to take it because that's just basically etched in stone now as part of the format. We're going to be discussing it with the panel today. Besides that, we've also announced over at fleshandblood.com or fabtcg.com that there are going to be some special guests attending the Pro Tour in Lille. Artists Federico Musetti, Otho Nikolaidis are going to be there. You know them from such great cards as Briar, as Lexi. I think Federico was in New Jersey as well, does some excellent art. So collect those shiny versions of the best cards that you got that they've done. Bring them to Lille. But beyond that, cosplayers Nicolas Bros, Valera, Miss Chalice will be there as well, representing the cosplay and creativity side, as well as Pleasant Kenobi will be there doing who knows what, just walking around being a Pleasant Kenobi. And besides that, the commentary team is also going to welcome Romain Nicolas to the team of L'Oeil de Fidia podcast. A wonderful, wonderful human being will be joining Brian Gottlieb and Tan and Grace, as well as myself on the commentary team. So it's going to be a good time in Lille. Can't wait to be there. How about before that? The Calling in Singapore is taking place this coming weekend. That will be the 20th and 21st of August. Now, there is a English broadcast that will be done remotely overnight. Yes, Stephen Cookus, aka DM Armada, and I are going to be up late with the coffee, jamming some top 8 action over in Singapore. The stream is going to be over at 983 Media. So basically, if you're listening to this video on YouTube, right here, right at this channel, so hit the subscribe button. That's going to be youtube.com/983media. If you want to catch it, it'll begin on early in the wee hours of the 21st on the Sunday, probably around 2:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's when Stephen and I are going to be locked and loaded to bring you some solid top 8 action over at the Calling in Singapore. The Columbus 10K is being held by Realm Gaming Network, and I promise you want to check this out. If you're going to be around on October 22nd or 23rd, Columbus is the place you want to be for Flesh and Blood action. A 10K, lots of side events, a cosplay contest. It's a 2-day event, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tournament put on by Keith and Jacob over at Realm Gaming, and I've got a ticket to the exclusive, the super exclusive after party, the Flesh and Blood Speakeasy. What does that include? Well, it includes an open bar and all you can draft. The tickets are very limited. They're $100 a piece, and I have one to give away for free. I'm going to be there. You probably want to be there as well. So first thing you got to do is go to realmgamingnetwork.com, check out the Fall Brawl. That would be the 10K in Columbus. Sign up for it. And then go ahead and create a card such as the one you'll see on your screen right here. A hero card of Flake. Be creative about it. The one that I like the best, or the one that convinces me the most, will score a ticket to the Speakeasy. So tweet at me, do what you got to do, make it happen. And again, finally, thank you so much to all of our Patreon members over here at Instant Speed. You guys are awesome. I sincerely appreciate it. For as little as $1 a month, you can keep the lights on here and just tell me I'm doing a good job. It means the world to me that you guys support us. Just listen and be kind is all I ask. But if you want to go the extra distance, we got 3 tiers over at patreon.com/instantspeedpod. So thank you so much. All right. Our guests, as I said, we have a wonderful panel. We've got a multiple champion in Michael Hamilton. We have the beautiful awesomeness of Zach Bunn. We've got Dave Rude. We've got Logan Peterson. We're talking Blitz. Let's get to it.
Instant Speed is proudly supported by BCW Supplies. If you need protection for your cards, be it sleeves, deck boxes, storage, organizational tools, or hey, are you a comic book collector, a coin collector? BCW Supplies has your hookup. Use the code ISP10. Get 10% off all of your orders. Go to bcwsupplies.com. BCW, protect, store, display. The Instant Speed Podcast welcomes a four-pack of heavy hitters to the program. For the first time ever, we have Zach Bunn of Team Covenant, a fellow fan of defunct card games that basically make us feel all like dinosaurs. Zach, you do some good work because you're always on my feed, and I'm always like, I have that card. I have those cards. Or, they're all buried away somewhere, be it Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, most Decipher stuff. But welcome for you, as well as the return of one Logan Peterson of Flesh and Pod podcast, as well as David Rude, a Pro Tour player, and the dude who basically runs the show for card games at Harry Tarantula, which is an institution in Toronto. Probably one of the hardest armories you'll ever play in your life is at Harry Tarantula. And of course, Mr. Michael Hamilton, who is a two-time Calling winner, won the Calling in Indianapolis, as well as the Calling that ran alongside Nationals in Orlando. All at once if you want to, but welcome, friends. It's nice to have you guys here.
Thank you.
I feel like calling me a heavy hitter is a weight joke, but we're gonna let it ride.
Well, I couldn't say ugly hitter, so I had to say heavy hitter. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So sorry. Okay, so we're all here for a reason, friends, and this is basically the fact that it has recently been discussed, announced, put out there into the ether that the World Championship format is going to include Blitz. And it's not just going to include Blitz as like a 3-pack of games. It's a 5-pack of Blitz games, possibly at the most crucial juncture of determining the top 8. So the format is going to be draft, it's going to be CC, and then it's going to be Blitz. You guys are all here because, from what I understand, there's a lot of conflicting opinions regarding not just the inclusion of Blitz, but Blitz in general. What is Blitz? Where does it sort of rank in terms of competitiveness? And we're just going to jump right into this. And I want to start with Zach, because Zach, you're the one who kind of triggered this whole idea that we should probably have a more lively discussion. You're against it, and I want to hear why.
I've since this weekend's Twitter fest on this topic, I love seeing people be so passionate about these things. It just means a lot of people care about this. But ultimately, personally, I'm just not a huge fan of the Blitz format in general. And it was a surprise. We're at least 12 weeks out-ish, I guess, from Worlds. But, my road to Worlds started about a year ago, last August, when I played in Road to National season for Flesh and Blood for the first time. And, one of the driving factors, I love playing this game. I love trying to be competitive at this game. I love testing with the team and the process and the traveling and the big events and all that kind of stuff. I really just enjoy it. So it's a few things that just hit for me, and there's a lot of nuance to it, of course. But my general impression was that Blitz was not a format to take seriously on my side. And I also we played a lot of Blitz up front. We did that actually for 5 or 6 months before switching to Constructed. And I remember I loved that format at the time. I loved Fab. I loved the game. And then we switched to Constructed, and then we went back to Blitz at some point, and I just comparatively did not enjoy it anywhere near like I do for Constructed. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But Journey to World starts, and even though we are still 12 weeks out, so there is some amount of time, there's also just the surprise factor of this really wasn't the expectation, at least on my part, that this would happen. And particularly like the games I look forward to the most, and even though I lost the game right at Pro Tour 1, round 13 against Sasha on camera, he's on Kano. I can still win my way into the top 8. Big high stakes game against a really good player on a really interesting deck that no one else had brought to the tournament. Those are that's like highlight moments in tabletop for me across all the games I've ever played. So beyond not really liking the Blitz format for reasons, and then being a little bit surprised that they announced it, it's also the last 5 rounds of the World Championship Swiss. So it just feels like personal preference, right? If I'm fortunate enough to play in the event, which that's all that needs to be said first, right? for all the games I've ever played, the support in the World Championship and everything happening in organized play is honestly better than any game I've ever played. And so I don't want the gratitude for all of these events that are being hosted to be lost because there's this one particular thing that I'm not as happy about. But ultimately, 5 of the games, if I'm fortunate enough to make it to day 2 of Worlds, you have the Uprising draft, which is also probably a topic for a whole different episode that I'm starting to feel that topic come up from a lot of players. But
Oh yeah.
if you make it to those 5 rounds and you're at a spot where you could put yourself in the top 8, I'm the joy I will derive from those games is going to be a lot less, personally. So that's the beginning of it for me.
Yeah, we're going to dig into a little bit more of the weeds in terms of what we're, some of the more, like, I get it. Everyone has a sentiment about whether they like Blitz or not. And that's sort of what I'm getting from you. And I am much like you, Zach, in the sense that, like, I started off, I think, on the other end where I was like, I don't really like Blitz. I would play CC all day if I could. I really didn't like Blitz. It wasn't until the team calling in Vegas where I put in the work and really got a little bit more of the nuances of the format. But I agree with you there. Like, it's definitely polarizing in terms of people love it or they hate it. There's no one who's just like, yeah, it's no big deal. But for yourself, let's move on to Logan. Logan, you're just prior to us recording, you sort of laid out a little bit of why Blitz is even in there. I want you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I saw from James White specifically was that Blitz is the most played format. And I'm going to concede right now to the people who are great players on this show right now, and I am not, that I'm most likely a spectator in this event. I still have some shots to get in. If I get in, great. I will feel amazing that I accomplished a thing. But the odds are that I'm going to be a spectator in this event, and I am intrigued to know, because to me, these big premier events are promotional events. They're there to advertise the game, to grow the game, to get eyeballs on the game, to increase interest. And in doing so, having all of the formats highlighted on these big stages goes a long way toward creating that intrigue, to creating that interest. So Blitz isn't for you. That's understandable. Blitz isn't for me. I also do not enjoy Blitz currently. I will jam some Kasai and be fine with it, but rarely happy about it. Because I think that the gameplay mechanic for myself is more robust in Classic Constructed. But as you even mentioned, Zach, as a new player, you jammed Blitz. That's what you started doing. And so when you get people that are watching this event and you're gaining traction with this event with the community of card players that are out there, converting players of other games, we're not going to say any 5-letter words on this podcast, but converting those players to interested in dipping a toe in this new thing, having Blitz as part of that, and let's be really honest, accessibility in Blitz is much higher, especially at those like armory levels and skirmish levels, than Classic Constructed. You hop into Classic Constructed right away, it's overwhelming. You hop into Blitz right away, it's digestible, because you can play more games in a shorter amount of time and really get a feel for the game. So at that point, I think that, and I've always said that Blitz, I felt like Blitz was going to be at Worlds. I would actually taunt the players I knew that were saving PTIs for Worlds. It's like, prepare for Blitz. It's going to be at Worlds. And like, there's no way. And then, well, okay, there's a way. Like, yeah, it makes sense to me that Blitz is a part of this. And I really think that this is a great move by LSS because it is going to increase intrigue in the game for people who are new and watching.
Yeah, in terms of 5-letter words, we can say magic. The 5-letter word that I
okay.
What hey, I got friends in magic. It's where there's no animosity here. But the 5-letter word we're not going to say is a Tarek because he bailed on us. So that is the forbidden 5-letter word for this episode.
None with Q's. Got it.
Luckily, we have another pro and double champion here, which is Michael Hamilton, and I want to get your perspective here because Logan, you made some really good points regarding the marketing aspect of the game, and you saying like this is something. It's a gigantic sort of like ad for the game to a degree, but at the same time, at what point is marketing going to interfere with the integrity of what you're trying to pull off, which is you want to put together an event to crown a world champion. This is the pinnacle of determining who the best player in the world is. Now, that can go either way. You can say, well, if you're going to do a tournament to determine who the pinnacle, the top level, the king of the hill of what the game is. It should be in its purest form, which is, some would say CC. That is the crown jewel of what this game is meant to be, or how the game is meant to be played. And you throw in a limited format, be it sealed or draft or whatever, and that can sort of shake things up. You're testing two elements. Blitz is just a watered down to a degree, version of what Constructed is. But for yourself, Michael, as the pro, as the double champion, you've won 2 callings. You've won Indianapolis and Orlando. How did this announcement shake you or change your perspective of how you're going to approach it? Do you like the inclusion of Blitz? How are you feeling about that?
Oh, personally, I would prefer if there was no Blitz, because I think Blitz is higher variance than Classic Constructed, and I can kind of get into that. Just like shorter games mean 1 or 2 bad draws is more likely to decide the game for you. You also don't get a sideboard, so matchups can matter more. But going back to what Logan said, it makes a lot of sense that Blitz is included. It's their biggest. Like the most players play it. I even started with Blitz. Me and Roger got some Blitz starter decks and started playing the game with Blitz. And I think that if you look at any of the Blitz callings, there's no questions that the people that won those tournaments are very skilled at the game. So it's not like Blitz doesn't take skill to do well at, and it makes sense for it to be a competitive format to me.
I hear you there. I definitely hear you there. For your Dave Ruud, again, you're a Pro Tour player. You're a long time pro when it comes to just card games in general. You've been on the Magic circuit for a while. Where do you stand on this? Not just as somebody who runs a lot of tournaments at Harry Tarantula, but somebody who prepares with a lot of the players as well. Harry Tarantula has one hell of a team with people like Sean Dollywell and of course Isaac Crute, yourself. Where does this stand from a team perspective in terms of preparation? Because a lot of people are either good at Blitz right away, they have the CC experience already, but is this changing the whole dynamic of how you and the team are preparing? What's your opinion of Blitz in World Championships?
My opinion is I don't feel super strongly about Blitz in general. I think it's completely fine to have in Worlds. I think it is by far the most played format. I actually think, like, we don't have the data on this, but it is where everybody starts playing. It's what's easiest if you've only played with friends, or if you've only played the 2-player starter decks. It is the easiest way to get into the game. And I think LSS is giving out like $400,000 at World Championship if you count the cash prizing and all the promos and things like that. And as pros, I mean, I don't consider myself one of the elite players, but I think I'm, a step below that. And I would say playing Blitz is just something we're going to have to deal with. Like, I'm a little surprised that Zach says that he's surprised that Blitz is at Worlds, because James White was on his podcast a few months ago and basically said so, that Blitz would be in upcoming Pro Tour level events. I thought it would be similar to like the way old Magic World used to be when James White played in, he played in some of those events, which used to be like a 3-day event plus top 8 on the 4th day. So you'd have like 2 formats, and then you'd have like a team competition, which my guess would have been like, you'd get like Canadian or champion of whichever country you're from, and then maybe like the person who's like highest on ELO. And I thought that would be Team Blitz maybe, but then like he basically said that Blitz would be one of the formats at pro level. And if you start from that basis of like they want to have Blitz at Pro Tour or Worlds level, it makes sense to put it at World instead of a Pro Tour, because if you're going to make people play Blitz at some point, there's 16 round at Worlds, there's more money, everybody's happy to be at Worlds. Whereas if you have a Pro Tour that's half Blitz, then it might, if people who do have issues with Blitz, it does have like a higher percentage of the event that it takes from.
I get what you're saying with there, and I think that, like, Zach, you can sort of chime in on this. Like, if this is something that James referred to on the podcast, I would probably infer that as well. If he's saying that there's going to be certain elements of Blitz on the pro scene, the first thing that comes to mind is not Worlds, in my opinion, and I don't like, and I think that Zach, you could probably maybe clarify of what your initial interpretation of that was.
Yeah, so obviously he said that on the cast, and then not that long after they had announced, I think it was in Europe, it was a different country where they had a call-in that was Blitz.
Krakow.
Yeah, and then they announced the Vegas world premiere, and I thought that was a really, at the time, exceptional way to kind of build a bridge from local casual to this scene using Blitz if you want to feature it, which is obviously a team of three in a lot of ways changes the variance that Michael was talking about. Because if you have three really good players on a team, if one person does have a couple bad draws and they never really get to go on offense and they just spend the whole game blocking and then they die, or they get comboed on turn one by a Reinhardt, whatever it is, you're not, two people on the team have to have that happen for you to basically lose the round or whatever. So I expected it to show up at tournaments, and I thought we had seen it showing up. And I think it kind of comes back to me in terms of expectations for people that have been around for, since it's over 2 years now in the game. When I first started playing, Blitz actually didn't even exist. It was draft sealed and classic constructed. And then they, launched Blitz in the lead up to Crucible of War. And / Crucible War was the set that really became a thing. And that's when we were pivoting into building decks and stuff. We'd basically been doing sealed up until that point. But the way it was presented at the time was very much like here's kind of an intermediary step that you can take. You don't need as many cards. The games are faster. It's before organized play, before local tournaments and armories and skirmishes and road to nats and that whole system. But just the pitch of it, and then combined with just my expectations, it always felt like Blitz was not necessarily intended as a format from the start, as much as it was added on as hey, there's a pandemic, people are stuck at home, we want to give easy ways for people to play this game that are a little bit different and faster and all that kind of stuff. And it feels that way, right? I've played a lot of games over the years. An example that it reminds me of is Imperial Assault, where it's this co-op miniature board game with a narrative. And then towards the end of design, they were like, why don't we actually add a PvP mode and have tournaments and stuff? And then it worked, and it was very fun. I really enjoyed that game. But it was clear after about 6 months to a year that it wasn't very intentional. And I feel that way a little bit with Blitz, where it's the same cards, the same math, the same equipment, the same characters that are balanced. There's additional characters in Blitz, but it's balanced around the same equations as classic constructed. You should have half as much health. So I actually don't think it's not that the variance of the cards and the values and that kind of stuff are so much different. It's just that you have half as much time in a game for that variance to even out, and for some strategies to even be possible. There are obviously heroes that just need a little more time for whatever it is they're trying to do to work. So anyways, I thought we'd seen how it was going to show up, to answer your question. And I thought Team Blitz as a format, that's really cool. I love team events. I do not like Blitz, and I went to that event because I love team events that much. Like, I'll go. I want that to be supported. I want them to do more team events. Please give me Team Sealed to draft. I would love that.
Yes.
But yeah, World Championship, I'm maybe a little bit of a purist, right? In my mind, Flesh and Blood is classic constructed, and draft, I think, is the other piece of that. But classic constructed, and so I've just always pictured it's going to be 3 rounds of draft and 4 or 5 rounds of constructed twice, and we're going to cut to a top 8 constructed, and that's what Worlds is going to be. And that's just a bad assumption on my part, obviously, at this point.
Oh, I mean, it was like making that assumption. It's definitely a fair assumption, because we haven't seen Blitz we didn't see it in New Jersey, even contemplated. There's only been, a couple of callings where Blitz was the primary focus here. Battle Hardens, whatever skirmishes are those are lower tier in terms of the tournament rankings. But this was always going to eventually circle back to this paragraph from fabtcg.com with the title, what is the intention for Blitz and other formats. This screenshot that was circulated a lot, that was a lot of discussion, which James White actually commented on, which mentioned that this was written 2 years ago, and things have changed definitely. But what's really relevant is what you said, Zach, which was Blitz was almost
a evolution to adapt to COVID protocols and limitations in terms of playing, be it time, space, whatever it is. And they mentioned that in this part of the article. We'll put it up on the screen for those who want to see. But ultimately, it just basically says that Blitz is casual. It's meant to support smaller tier tournaments. It was never created to be where $100,000 is on the line, more or less. And that I think is what, to me, is driving me from being 100% in, yeah, let's do Blitz, I don't care, like it's part of the game, to the fact that maybe there is something to removing it. And I want to get your perspective of this, Michael, first, which is, in my view, World Championships is not the World Championships of CC. It's not the World Championships of World Championships of Draft. It's the World Championships of Flesh and Blood. So if Blitz is that prevalent in the culture, if it's that played, if there are actual stakes out there for Blitz, be it in Krakow, be it the team events in Vegas, should it not be included to determine who the best Flesh and Blood player is? Not the best CC player, not the best drafter, but the best all around in 3 of the most important and decisive formats in the game. Michael, what do you think?
Hard to argue with Blitz being one of the most important formats, but there are definitely other formats that aren't included in Worlds. Like, there's no sealed. We're only drafting Uprising. We could draft some of the other formats too, because they test different skill sets. And it would be really cool if you could test players across all the different formats that people really play Flesh and Blood. Like, I think Commoner is a very competitive format that hasn't really gotten the support that I think it deserves. And I think Welcome to Wraith Draft is a very good format that I haven't gotten to ever play at a competitive level, and I probably won't get to. But you can't really argue with Blitz being one of the most popular formats, one of the most played formats. So it makes sense to include it.
Popularity, though, this is the other thing. And it's like, popularity is one thing. The same thing with our subjective opinions of what Blitz is, because Zach doesn't like it, but liked it at the beginning. I didn't like it at the beginning. I like it now. Everybody has this sort of fluctuating opinion of Blitz because, yeah, trust me, I've been there. I've died on turn 1. Like, it's happened. I haven't even gotten to play a card. I didn't even get to block because I forgot about Arcane Barrier, like things like that. I have been in those situations where a dice roll has determined the outcome of the game. But subjective opinion of Blitz and just the sheer popularity of it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Logan, I'm going to move to you here. Do you think that Blitz is a legitimately competitive format? Like, does it deserve to be there off the merits that skill and deck building prowess and those are in Blitz you need to be good at those aspects to properly navigate Blitz? Like, do you feel like it has competitive merit?
Short answer is yes. The longer, more fleshed out answer that I think you're hoping for is that if you're going, like, it is a mind shift, and the world champion of Flesh and Blood should be able to master the different ways that you have to approach the different formats. You don't approach draft the same way as you approach Classic Constructed. You don't approach Classic Constructed the same way you approach Blitz, and the person that is the best at approaching each will have the advantage at becoming crowned world champion. And with Blitz specifically, I've died to the dice roll in Classic Constructed. I've died to the dice roll in every game that I've ever played in my life. Like, it's happened before. That's just something that does happen on occasion. Is it the most common thing? No, it isn't. And also, to address a point earlier that Michael brought up, you do have Commoner now. And I feel like Commoner really has slid into what the original purpose of Blitz was. And Blitz has moved up in that hierarchy a little bit to become the third competitive format. And yeah, if you want to talk variance, sealed exists. If you want real variance, open a sealed pool. That's real variance. You are not in any control whatsoever of the pool you open. You are at the mercy of the pack gods. So ripping packs, that's variance. Blitz, you can build a deck that you can pilot to the best of your abilities and have an edge. Are you going to succumb to variance on occasion? Yes. Is it going to be potentially more variance than Classic Constructed? Also, yes. Zach made a very good point. you have half the health. You don't have as much time to pivot back into the game. If something goes, if your first few turns are dead, you might just lose to that. But it's also not technically going to happen every time that way, and it's doubtful it does. The odds are that you're going to play a game of Flesh and Blood, and the most skilled player of that game will win. And when that happens, that the deserving player moves forward. So I believe that Blitz belongs, and that Blitz is a great format for this as a skill testing format.
Now, I like the point that was made here by many of you, and it was brought up by Zach initially, which was the fact that there's variance is going to kick in because you have a lot less runway essentially to even that out, and I think that is a key element. And when you're talking about there are certain heroes that take time to set up, like who's going to play Aura Prism in Blitz? It's never going to happen. You're going to eat 2 turns of damage and be completely done before you have 2 or 3 auras on the board before anyone gives half an F about what the hell you're doing on your side of the board. I feel like it's absolutely a very much you need to be on either the hyper aggressive aspect of the game or the hyper control lockdown aspect of the game. There's no in between. There's almost no way to say that we're either going to 2 turns or we're going to 10 turns. Like there's nothing in between. I'm decking you out or I'm dying on turn 2. There's nothing in between. The variance level here, and I know I know I don't want to say there's no science to this, but Zach, you had replied to a tweet to me saying that it's 80% luck, 20% skill. That's obviously, I don't think that there's no, rhyme or reason to those numbers. I get the point that you're trying to make. I'm not trying to lock you down and say it's actually 74% variant. Like
Isn't this just a Fort Minor song? Like anybody? No?
That one might be long gone. What Fort Myers song?
Fort Minor.
Fort Minor, yeah.
Oh, is there a Simpsons reference in this?
Well, there's. Go ahead, David.
80% skill, like
10% concentrated power of will.
Okay, that's like the Linkin Park thing.
Remember the Name by Fort Minor is the name of the song.
Oh, okay. Well, all right, never mind. I always thought that was Linkin Park. Now I feel like an asshole. But that said, Zach, you're talking about 80% luck, 20% skill. I know that those aren't scientific numbers because they're just not, but I get the point you're trying to make here is that there's a significant lean towards variance in this format. And I want to talk a little bit about how to perhaps adjust for it, because some have said that, or suggested rather, that a sideboard in Blitz or a best of 3 option might be the way to go to further legitimize what Blitz is. But before we dig into that, I'm gonna start with you, Dave, and we'll go on. I just want to mention that the spirit of Blitz was quick games. So best of 3 just kind of completely scrubs out what the whole spirit of what Blitz games were meant to be. I understand implementing it, but now it's no longer Blitz. It's just half CC with a sideboard. And anyways, but Dave,
you call it Magic.
But, but the thing about it is that Magic has immense amounts of variance in it, based purely off of the fact that you need to hunt for your own resource system to pay for cards. And if you get screwed, you've got another kick at the can to actually make it competitive. This has been, I think, the underlying foundation of why best of 3 has been a necessity in Magic, because no one wants to say, well, I drew 2 lands and now all my 3 drops are in my hand and I can't find another mountain or another island or whatever.
They use a hand smoothing algorithm in their best of 1 on their online client for a reason.
Yeah. So that said, it's definitely an important element. But Dave, what do you think about, keeping the spirit of what Blitz is meant to be, but trying to perhaps round out the edges to make it a little, to sort of, maybe shave off some of that variance that are problematic in the format?
Yeah, first of all, I think the whole idea of best of 3 is not great. First of all, there's some decks, when the best aggro decks were dominating Blitz, let's say like Briar or things like that, or Agrify, some ways to beat it is to play ultra defensive Oldhim. I'm not sure it's possible to win a best of 3 game in 50 minutes with Oldhim. I think it's easier to win one game of best of 1, even in Classic Constructed. Because sometimes you'll go to 3 games and it just, so when that happens, now you're like, well, I know this is the deck that beats hyper aggro decks, but I can't win 50 minutes, so this deck's unplayable. Similar to how people felt going into US Nats, and obviously Michael showed that that wasn't true. You could win in 50 minutes and things like that. I think that pushes some problems with that. There's a few other things I want to say. First, I think this isn't the Olympics. Like, I think a lot of times people, assume the Pro Tour means the professional tour, and we all want to compete. And nobody's making a living from playing on the Pro Tour. I think the real, it's fun to compete, see who's the best, and all that stuff. But to me, deep down, as much as people are gonna hate me saying this, it's the promotional tour. It's there to push the game, and it's there. We'll play, and we might complain about the format, or we might complain about some cards that got banned and our deck is not viable and things like that. But at the end of the day, they put up money. We're gonna show up and see who's the best at that specific format. And I hear the term variance being thrown around a lot there's not that much variance in CC compared to Blitz. I'm going to be honest, with a lot of people that I see posting on Twitter and things like that, I'm not sure variance is a bad thing for some of these people. Like, it's not a bad thing to have some variance in events. Like, no offense, not everybody's like, one of the top 10 players in the world. If that's the way, like, I don't think this game's supposed to be chess. You're not supposed to have the same winner every game all the time. I don't know. I think some variance is not that bad in part of your tournament a little bit.
Yeah, that response came with a little shade, definitely. So
A lot of shade. I definitely am not getting into it today.
I know. I get what you're saying here, and like, the one thing I can't reconcile is, like, I get that there's variance, but people who win regularly in Blitz are preparing themselves and building their decks to either adjust or to survive or thrive within a particular metagame. At a certain regard, you're thinking, okay, like, I don't get a sideboard. I get all the equipment I need, so I'm protected against XYZ. But ultimately, I need to make sure that this 40 card deck is tight, it's solid, it gets the job done. And then I got to just rely on the skill set of prognostication and just reading the runes of what the meta is going to look like. Because bringing in a deck that's going to absolutely flounder against what's out there, or bringing a deck that might capitalize on it, and at what point does your flesh and blood gameplay go beyond just the table and the shuffling and playing the cards? At what point?
I don't want to interrupt you too much here, but it's the same people winning. Look at who won all the Blitz events. It's like Yanji and Pablo. What's his name? The guy who won the
Pablo Pintor.
Like, the Australian one was like, what, 3 people who worked on Flesh and Blood. That's a whole other thing. But the other person in the team top 8 was Hayden. Like, it's not like people are just lucking their way into winning these events. It's the same people. Like, there might be like a slight, small, like, higher variance a little bit, but it's, in the end, the best players are still winning all these events over and over again.
So on that note, I think, just to add to my point about, because the variance conversation is very packed, or it's a loaded conversation with a lot of assumptions, I think, that can be made. But I don't think you're wrong. So even my 80% estimation that was on Twitter that you were quoting. So the recognition for me is, when you don't have a sideboard and you have half as much health, beyond the like general reality that you can build decks that are trying to win literally on turn 1, and you don't have to have a prolonged game plan. But I definitely think skill matters in Blitz just as much as it does in Constructed. And if you're, the difference here for me is, I always say, if a player is 1 to 100 on their skill level, right? Michael Hamilton, one of the best players in the world, let's give him a 98, right? He's in a 98.
He's a diamond ranked player.
Yeah, D Rude saying he's 1 step below the elite player. So let's give D Rude a 90. So in that case, right, I think the recognition for me is, at these high level, especially the end of the World Championship Swiss, the hope is that you do have some of the best players in the best games, and they're very well prepared and stuff. But the reason I say 80%, and again, obviously that's not scientific, and it was maybe a bit hyperbolic in nature, but
I just want to say, just interject. Like, I knew that you just threw numbers out there. It was just to prove a point. I would never try to like sort of nail you to say like, yeah, you said 80.
This.
Yeah, no, that wasn't the point.
I do think, a lot of times when you're at the Pro Tour, you're at these events, the skill level gap might be a 95 versus a 96, right? It's fractional. It's the difference in skill at the top level is low. If you're a 96 and you're playing a 72 rated player at Blitz, I think you're still going to win most of your games. Like, so skill matters is my point in that. But when it's a 96 versus a 95, the 96 is a little bit better. And I actually agree with you a little bit, D-Rude, on variance being kind of a good thing. It's not chess, right? It's not a solved equation. There is unknown variables, and stuff can go right and stuff can go really wrong at the same time. But to me, and this is kind of the question I'm curious to hear from the pro blitzers, I don't believe that blitz tests a player's skill in the game in a different way than constructed does. It is a different format. So I'll give it that, right? You have to now solve a different equation. But it's essentially the reason you see the Haydens and the Pablos winning the blitz events is it's the same game. It's just half as long and half as much health. And things that are viable are decks that can try to kill you on turn 1, right? Or turn 2. Or the hyper aggro control that we already talked about, the extremes. So, but when you get to these end rounds of an event and the skill gap is minute, the more health that you have, the longer of a game that your skill difference has to make itself apparent, right? And so whether or not you want something super controlled in that nature, and I think a 96 and a 95, they play 100 times, it's probably a 52-48 split, right? It's super close. So the variance were like in terms of who wins out of 100 games, right? Or whatever the math ends up being. Whereas with blitz, I do think you get the wrong matchup. If you have a certain matchup and you're going second or you're going first, there's just inevitable things, and it may be better now. I've heard that it is better, but when I first tried blitz after not playing it for a long time, I played for a day and multiple times was killed turn 0, 1, or 2 by Kano or Viserai or whatever was happening at the time. And just picturing that, like if someone is on that last game at the World Championship and it's kind of a win and in moment for them, and they just get dunked on by a deck on turn 1, it's like, even on stream, that's pretty unsatisfactory. Even not dunked on, but if the one player gets on offense and then the other player is just blocking until they die, that's just not a very engaged, like that. I can feel that in my bones, and I also don't want to watch that game necessarily. At the same time, I could be totally wrong about the format, and maybe it's super exciting and fun at the end of the tournament, and everyone's kind of a little more relaxed because it's blitz and not constructed.
So is the skill set in terms of blitz just like, does I don't say the determinant factor necessarily reside in the deck building and the assessment of what the meta is, but it seems like with the game so close and matchups mattering so much because there is such a small narrow margin of error, like you cannot screw up, like you can't draw poorly if your opponent draws well. Does the determinant factor in the skill set really reside in the deck building process and the assessment of the meta? Is that where the winners are essentially already predetermined? You walk in with deck X, which beats, which is favored against 80% of the field because you anticipated 80% of the field to be whatever it is. Does that where this kind of skill set kind of kicks in and says and where those winners are determined?
I guess I'm just left with the question, what skill sets are we testing if we're framing it earlier about you have to master all the formats and be the best at the game? Are there specific skill sets that blitz tests outside the capacity to solve a format? Because construct is already testing that, right? And I think it's testing it on a higher level, given that you have a sideboard and you can take a match that, you can decide to choose how much your sideboard to commit to your worst match, or just give up that match and be really good into the other stuff. So I don't quite get what blitz is testing, if that's the goal of this. From the promotional angle, I'm totally get it. If you want to promote the game and you want people to see people playing high level blitz, I can't really argue that. Right. What your goal is for the World Championship is really relevant in that regard.
So does it get more legitimized if it's a best of 3 or if there was a sideboard? Logan, what do you think?
That's a hard question. I think that it takes the spirit of blitz and kind of turns it on its head. And I don't, in some cases, it's a distinction without a difference because, as pointed out by, I think Michael pointed it out, where playing mid-range in blitz, not good. Especially right now where it's either hyper control or hyper aggro. Having a best of 3, is that going to change it? I mean, you're still literally piloting the same decks against each other with the same life totals. Does the polarization of the format doesn't change? So you're just doing the same thing 2 times or 3 times which isn't going to, like, the outcome differential is probably not enough for best 2 out of 3 to matter. That's my just quick take on it. Very willing to be wrong, very willing to be called an idiot, but the problems I see, and I think that I'm very interested in the long discussion of the skills tested, because you're right, it's the same game. It absolutely is the same game. However, your ability to attack blitz is going to change because you don't have a sideboard, because you have to say, okay, these are cards I would normally have in my sideboard. Do I try to fit them in here in case I see a matchup, this 40 cards, just in case I do come across this matchup? I mean, do I play a yellow instead of a red? That's a dirty thing to say. But do I play a yellow instead of a red, so at least I have some pitch value out of this thing, since I don't want reds in this deck? I mean, like, what? There's a lot of different things that are skill testing as far as the deck building goes that aren't necessarily that way in Classic Constructed. And I think that that's more of the test, not necessarily the gameplay. But yeah, I don't like best 2 out of 3. Sideboard options in Blitz I could listen to, because giving a little bit of extra leeway to make some of those matchups a little more interesting, I think, is relevant, worth talking about. I would just literally leave the format the same as it is, with the same number of cards, and just allow some of those slots that are given to equipment right now to be available to sideboard.
Sorry if I can just jump in on the sideboard thing. I think a lot of us have either played Magic or other games before who did have sideboards. I'm not sure exactly what everybody's background is. I know Michael played Magic before, but to somebody, and I know Zach must have taught lots of people how to play Flesh and Blood when the game was starting. I know he has he's done a lot for the game. It's incredibly daunting to try to teach somebody or explain to somebody how sideboarding works and what to take out of your deck. Even if, like, it's very easy to just copy a list online and just be like, this is a deck, this is what I'm playing. And that be the intro to people playing competitive Flesh and Blood and evolve from there. Adding a sideboard to that is just a daunting thing to explain to people. It is also a reason why in Magic these days, and I think in Flesh and Blood too, a sideboard guide is the number one thing that people want to pay for, want to follow content creators and things like that, because if they don't have the time to study the game and everything, sideboard guides are like the easiest way to still play the game and still be competitive. I just think having, again, my angle, like when they first announced Worlds, the format, I retweeted it and I said, my only minor issue is that I wish Blitz wasn't at the end of the event. So I agree with Zach on that part. I wish it was at the start. And that goes to another whole discussion that I'm not going to get into today, that I think, tiebreakers in Flesh and Blood are very flawed, and it gets exposed the more rounds you add to the tournament. But yeah, I wish Blitz was first, but I think at the end of the day, it's not, as big of a deal as others seems to think. But yeah, my only thing is, it's really hard to try to explain to somebody who's never played card games, who's never sideboarded before, how it works.
Yeah, that's a discussion I've had. Like, I mean, myself having 4 or 5 years in competitive Gwent, and it's like Hearthstone. There's no sideboard. It's just the deck you have is the deck you roll with in tournaments and whatnot. And it's for some, it's a very foreign concept, but it's such an important and meaty part of the meal that you have to really, hammer down with. And for Michael, for yourself, if first of all, like, do you like seeing Blitz as a competitive or a viable competitive option, adding a sideboard and a best of 3 element to it, from your perspective as a pro, as a champion, does that just add does that right away just say, okay, this legitimizes the format, this is going to bring more people to take it seriously? Or is it just saying, like, you're just trying to put makeup on the pig? Like, we know what it is. You're not trying to pull a fast one on us. We know it's still Blitz, and we're still not going to give it any respect from a competitive standpoint.
I think a sideboard does do a lot to improve, like, the competitive nature of it. It increases deck viability by a lot, because currently, I think it was David that said this, not me, that mid-range isn't really viable, and you're either like the super fast aggro or super fast control. Well, or super long control.
We've been throwing the hot potato around. That was me who said it. It just went from Michael to Dave. Okay. And it's just okay.
But once you add sideboards, there's room for the more mid-rangey decks to kind of like take a role where they can sideboard into whatever role they need to take for a specific matchup. Whereas right now, the mid-range decks don't really work, because they either they either can't be prepared to beat the slower controlling decks, or they can't be prepared to beat the faster aggressive deck. So it's really hard to bring a mid-range deck that actually works to blitz. Best 2 out of 3. I know David did say this one. The time issue with best 2 out of 3 of blitz is definitely a thing, because right now, if you tried to make best 2 out of 3 work, our single matches go 35 minutes. So if you want to multiply that for 3 for 3 rounds, that's an hour and 45 minutes per round. That's a really long time. But one thing they aren't doing that I think could also help reduce variance over a longer tournament. For Worlds, we're playing 3 rounds of draft and 3 rounds of class constructed in the first day. 3 rounds of draft, 5 rounds of class constructed. Then the second day, we're playing 3 rounds of draft, 5 rounds of blitz. So the second day, we're going to end almost 2 hours sooner than the first day. They could definitely fit more rounds of blitz in if their goal was to reduce variance in the same time frame, because like the more rounds you play of something, obviously total variance goes down in the tournament. And that's something that I think would help a lot with reducing that variance.
All right. The common theme here is just variance is going to be a determining factor in some of these games. It's flat out going to happen in the same regard that, like, you know, if you queue in as an Oldhim into a Prism, like you just feel like I just lost the lottery here, or I lost whatever it is. This was an unwinnable situation. And in certain matchups, you're going to look at it. You're going to look at your first hand. You're going to look at the attack that they present to you on turn 1, and you'll be like, I'm well out of my league on this one. Like, this is just a wash for it. But putting 5 rounds of blitz towards the end of the tournament. Some of you have come out and said that I'm okay with blitz, but it's just timed poorly. Is there actually a good place to put the blitz in here? Because a lot of people are gonna have these, they're right up against the edge. Their whole tournament life is teetering at the edge of a coin here, where they now have to navigate the coin flips of blitz and to try to go ahead and secure a top 8. This is going to be problematic, because you're going to see some people who, frankly, are going to crush it all the way through, and then perhaps sputter out and go 1-4 in the final rounds, and just their entire hopes and dreams go up in flame because they either made a poor deck choice, or they've lost coin flips and they just couldn't recover, or they just never got a hand to play. Zach, is there a good place for blitz? I know that you don't want it at all, but is there a good place for blitz? Is there a good amount of blitz? What if you were sort of adjusting it? Blitz has to be there. Is there a better way to implement it?
My initial response was going to be, I think the best place for it is in the side events.
Yeah, I like that. No, that's good. That's fine.
No, if you're wanting to do it, right? I think it's kind of funny people talking about the sideboard and not wanting to do it because it makes it a little complex and stuff, and that just kind of hints at that this really wasn't originally designed to be the hyper competitive format, right? There is variance. It's accepting that on the beginning, but to answer your question, I think they've kind of created a problem for themselves, right? And D-Rude hinted at this earlier, but the earlier you lose in a tournament, it's significantly worse for you. So if you put blitz on day 1, now there are going to be people that don't even make it to day 2 because of blitz. They may not get to play constructed. Also, just losses at that point are way heavier weighted because of the system that they've created. So as much as I'd like to say, like, hey, instead of draft on the first day, can we just start with 3 rounds of blitz as like it's a warm up? You get your day going. It's a different kind of format. It's that kind of a vibe, and then you switch over to constructed, right? Given how their system works, I don't know that there's a better place to put it. 5 rounds out of 18 seems like a lot when 6 rounds are draft already. That's 11 rounds of, I love draft. I love draft as a competitive format. I think really good players, and the draft format itself, what set it is, matters a lot. But really good players, that's a different skill set to me than classic constructed, right? It's not solving a format and solving deck building constraints and figuring out how to put together the best stack and evaluating the meta and all that kind of stuff. It's literally drafting's a different skill set completely. So I like that inclusion. But anyways, it's a lot of, we have 6 rounds of draft, 5 rounds of blitz, which feels less like a world championship to me. Honestly, it's just not what I expected out of it. And that's okay. Like this is maybe the expectation we should have going forward, and it's their tournament. And I kind of keep circling around that. But to directly answer the question, I don't know where you put it. I don't know how many rounds you make it.
It's sort of like this sore thumb, like it just sticks out, right? And there's nowhere to hide it. And you know what's great about this, and this is what I love about this conversation, is that I came into here completely adamant that Blitz should be in World Championships. That it's part of it. It's important. You need to be good at it if you want to be the world champ. But I'm starting to lean a little bit more towards Zach's side here, and this is why I want to have this conversation. But go for it.
I think the argument that people are saying is that you can't put it first. Like, this is what argument I've heard is you can't put it first because some people then don't get to make day 2 and don't get to play CC at all, and those people are going to complain. I don't see why you need to have a cut for day 2. Like, they haven't announced it. Some tournaments I've played for Magic before don't have a cut for day 2. If 64th place in this tournament is $1,500 US. People go 3-5 on day 1. Let them play day 2 if they want to. If they want to be like Tarek went 4-3 at the PT, he dropped to play the call-in because to him it's more important to have a finish at a calling than sneak into the money. But somebody like me who went 4-3, I kept playing on day 2. I would say have Blitz first would be my suggestion. Have no cut and then let people. But like, you can go 2-6 on day 1, 8-0 on day 2, and make top 64. That would be the way I would suggest doing it if they were trying to move it to a better place, in my opinion.
So a couple of things here. One, I think Dave just took a shot at my fantasy team by pointing out Tarek's day 1 record at the Pro Tour. Second, in that I'm about to make Dave hate me more, because why not put Blitz at the beginning of day 2 and have 3 rounds of draft at the end? Because you're going to have your top tables be your top placed people for draft, so your pods are going to be stacked at the top. And I know you dislike Uprising as a draft format heavily, Dave. That's why I pointed that out. And I've heard a lot of polarizing thoughts on the draft formats, and I understand it. Like, I got into arguments about how much I dislike Monarch draft, and still find ways to win at Arcane Rising draft. I don't know. But I think that makes it at least a little bit more interesting, and it does take some of the pressure off of the way that people see Blitz in this, because they see it as the knockout rounds where it's really just positioning yourself for the top 8 drafts for your way in. So maybe that's your answer. Maybe that's where it belongs.
Yeah, there's no clear-cut way to sort of throw it in there. And I mean, like, putting it first, people are just going to get upset that they're like, my whole hopes and dreams went up because I went 0-5 or 2-3 in Blitz, and I lost early, and I can't recover. It's not happening. Even though Pablo Pintor won the Pro Tour by starting his journey 0-2. That in my regard, I think that is a legendary thing that I think people should talk about forever, is Pablo's path to victory. That's a whole other story. But there's also the argument that people can reconcile having Blitz in the tournament, even where it is, because at the end of the day, the winner is going to have to win 3 consecutive games of Classic Constructed. That's what the top 8's going to be. If you're there, good for you. You did it. But Classic Constructed is what is going to essentially dictate who wins. Michael, do you feel like there's any, like, if you've played in formats that have various different sort of like a dual format, be it like draft, and you've played in those as well, does the positioning of what starts, like starting CC then moving to draft, or the opposite, do you have a preference, and how does that impact preparation? How does that impact the tournament as a whole, and where would you like to see Blitz on the format schedule?
So I actually think where Blitz's position is fine. If you're gonna have Blitz, like we were saying earlier, the tiebreakers your losses at the start matter the most because of tiebreakers. So like losing your last round and not making top 8 in a Blitz game sucks. But if you lost that Blitz game earlier in the tournament, you wouldn't even have a win for top 8 because your tiebreakers are going to be bad. So I think Blitz at the end, cutting before top 8 and then switching to Classic Construction for the top 8 is kind of perfect if you're going to include Blitz at some point. The other thing is, I think starting the day with draft makes a lot of sense, because draft you're required to play in pod. So if you ended the day with draft, a person, you can get paired up or paired down because you're required to play in pod for drafts. So if you had draft right before the cut to top 8, then the top draft pod, someone that goes into that draft pod, they might win their first 2 rounds of that draft, and then they get paired against someone who's 1-1 instead of someone that's 2-0 because you're trying to match in the pod and trying to match. Sorry, you might get. I don't know whether you'd get matched against someone who is 1-1 and has the same total record as you on the day, or if you're going to get matched against someone who is also 2-0, even though they've got one more loss than you total in the tournament. Either way, it's not ideal to have that as your winning in for the top 8 because that leads to like really weird situations where it's a winning in for one player and it's not for the other.
And I mentioned that I love chaos because that's kind of why I bring these things up. Is I really love chaos.
Screw it. Let's do a shapeshifter draft. Last 5 rounds.
We'll do.
Let's do shapeshifter. Everyone gets a box in the pod, and you just dump your box in the middle, and everyone just randomly blindly picks packs. And you
lots of Dynasty, unseen, unspoiled.
That's a whole other conversation. Is what will Dynasty bring? That's a future episode. But we're kind of wrapping up here. We're hitting time really close here. I wanted to end this really quickly. We ran a completely, fully, and NASA approved scientific poll on my Twitter account. In a couple hours, I think it was about 6 hours that it's been live. Does Blitz in its current iteration belong in the World Championship format? 68 point some odd percent, we'll call it 69%, say yes. Say yes. So again, this is 181 votes. So this is nothing, frankly, in the grand scheme of things. But I think that obviously, it's not 181 people who are participating in Worlds. It's 181 people who are consuming the tournament in one way, shape, or form. So from the arguments and the discussion that occurred early on from a marketing perspective, from the fact that Dave called this a promotional tour, not a professional tour, I think that there's definitely reason to put it in there to showcase the game. And I think people do want to see it. But I think there's going to be this rude awakening that's going to occur when people come in to the stream and go out to get a drink before the first turn is played and come back and the game's over. I think there's going to be if there's 5 rounds, I think there's going to be certain rounds that are going to be absolute blowouts and not be intriguing gameplay. They're not going to be good ambassadors for what, trying to sell the game to people who might be casually tuning in. I think that is definitely a risk here. And I honestly, at the beginning of this entire episode, I was dead set on Blitz being in there, but I think I'm a 50-50 now, man. And I think Zach has really kind of roped me in a little bit. I don't agree at all in the 80-20 variance split thing. Obviously those numbers are just, it's just whatever. It is what it is, but I don't think that variance is going to play as huge a factor, but I do think that having Blitz in there is potentially has its blemishes from the results and how the results are going to be dictated, and from a marketing perspective, because putting this on camera and having 2 of the 5 rounds be unintriguing blowouts where one player didn't even get a chance to really counterattack, that can be detrimental to the game as well. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
You put Starvo on camera. Come on.
It's true.
That's also no pressure, but that's on you guys to find backup matchups, right? That's why you have multiple matches. You get to showcase a bunch of different games, a bunch of different decks. Within a small time frame, give people, not the same deck battling mirror match over and over again. I think having 3 games in an hour is something that's interesting to watch too.
Well, we actually I had a meeting with SCG today to discuss the U.S. Nationals, where obviously draft is going to be a part of it. And one of the things that Tannen actually brought up was like, hey, be prepared for a game to end in 5 minutes. It's completely possible. You need backup matches, you need recordings, you need things like that. And at the same time, you could also wait for those slogs of those sort of like back and forth grindy matches that can take forever. That's definitely a possibility. And in my mind, I was like, that absolutely will translate to the Blitz format, because if there's 2 control Oldhams that are, just kind of staring at each other, circle jerking while they kind of just run their crown back and forth. Like these are problems. These are absolutely problems from that perspective. But man, like it can go either way. It's dangerous television from that perspective, where the viewers and the ratings are going to kind of tank if it's just terrible. And yeah, it's going to be on people like myself and like Brian and Armada to keep people interested and try to sell potentially a format
that is looking really gross and greasy to people and say like, no, this is great. This is the pinnacle of competition right here, where player X got to do exactly nothing but eat it for 5 straight minutes, and that was the end of it. But
Yeah, but how many times do people yell about a turn 1 Kano kill in CC?
But those are exciting, and they're you got to cobble those together.
Going off in Blitz, exciting. Like, I think it can be. I think people do enjoy it at times. And also, I'll never get the image of circle jerking crowns out of my head. So thank you.
Jeez. And there goes my career. Well, we're going to go around the horn one more time to just sort of close this out, because I thought that this was a very awesome conversation. You guys are rock stars all the way through. So thank you so much for just, all the various different levels of expertise all around the board. So you guys are awesome. We'll start with you, Dave. Parting shots, my friend, and close it out with, I guess, where can we find more of old man yelling at clouds? Because that seems to be your your Twitter motto, your Twitter mantra.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me at DRootHD on Twitter. That's mostly where I don't do any other kind of type of content or anything like that. Yeah, my parting shots are just, people want to see this. People want to see this at the biggest stage, and it's not just LSS that wants to see it. And people want to see the game that they play at their armory on Sunday played by the best players in the world for the highest stakes that this game has to offer.
I like it. Logan.
You can find me on Twitter at Logan Peterson or at FleshPod, and also on Flesh and Pod, which comes out every Tuesday. We are the last week tonight of Flesh and Pod, I think. But I'm tweeting about this a lot lately. I think it's a very nuanced discussion and a lot of fun to have with a variety of people. My parting shot is embrace the chaos. And there may be, this might flame out. This might be something that they'll never do again. So if that's the case and it doesn't work, you got to witness something unique. If it does work and the naysayers are quelled, as is a key word now, I guess, in Flesh and Blood, then, we get to see more of it. So let's just let it play out, see what happens, and embrace the result, and understand that this is still in its infancy and it's still a learning experience across the board. And the game will only get better trying new things.
I like it. 2022, someone's going to have to 5-0 Blitz to sneak into top 8. 2023, it's going to be commoner. And in 2024, someone's going to have a winning in a cosplay contest.
It's going to be Ultimate Pit Fight top 8.
Yeah, I like it. All right, Michael, how about yourself?
You can find me on Twitter at HadesBlade, or on the Manor podcast. We come out every Friday, me and Roger. Final shot, I guess. I think that Blitz being at Worlds is a decision that has been made. It seems very unlikely they'll change it. And the people that have the most to lose for this being the choice made is LSS. So they believe in it. So we should just try our best and make the best of what we got. And it's not every day you get a chance to play or watch a $300,000 tournament for a card game you love. So just make the best of it.
I like it. Good old wholesome Michael. Also saying that, well, LSS is the ones who are on the hook for this, so suck it. It's definitely relevant. Thank you so much, my friend. And finally, the catalyst for this discussion, Zach Bunn, my friend now. It's official. I do sincerely, again, like I said, first of all, there's so much garbage on the internet, and there's so much negative discussion and people arguing whatever. I didn't agree with Zach, and here we are, and now I kind of agree with Zach. We had a little back and forth, and I said, dude, there's an absolutely better way to have this conversation. Let's do it. And we did it. And this is what this is. So I do sincerely appreciate A, your time, and B, just your willingness to have this discussion. But yeah, parting shots, Zach.
Well, first off, I just want to say thanks for having me on and taking the time to do this. I know Logan and Michael and you create content, and I think content creators are the heartbeat of these communities. You guys do a ton of work. Obviously, D-Root, you're working in the store. I think retailers play a huge part in all this. And I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to play this game and to be a part of this community. And you're talking about this online conversation, and a lot of online conversation is negative. But the Fab community on Twitter particularly is a really bright spot for me. I see people all the time talking about getting off Twitter or Instagram because it's just too toxic, and Facebook. And I've never felt more positivity in an online community for a game that I play than I have for Flesh and Blood on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Zach Bunn. Of course, Team Covenant, we stream Fab pretty much every Tuesday. Won't be for the next couple of weeks because I'm heading to France for the Pro Tour. And honestly, as much as we're critical of these decisions, and I think it's good to have honest, I think the world needs more of it, honest, critical conversations where you're willing to come to the table, sit across from someone that you disagree with. It's part of why I love tabletop games. It puts you across the table from people you otherwise probably never would have taken the time to sit across from. And as long as we all work towards staying positive and the same goals, the world will be a better place, honestly. And I love Fab. I love what Legend Story is doing. I will be at the World Championship one way or another. Whether I'm playing in it remains to be seen. And I'm as excited as ever for Legend Story. And hopefully none of the commentary here is it's really not even negative, right? All of this comes from a care. And that's what I felt even on Twitter. It was getting a little spicy from some people. It obviously directly affects some. It's a whole new format to prepare for that people weren't necessarily expecting. It's a big tournament. It's a big moment. So all that to say, I love Fab. If you're out there and you're listening to this and you love Fab, keep loving it. Keep having the conversations. Keep being positive and keep doing what you do because it's just an absolute delight to get to take part in all of this.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. All right. Well, friends, thank you so much again for doing the show. You guys have busy schedules. You guys have lots to do, but I do appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you guys for listening. And to all our Patreon members, thank you so much for keeping the lights on and doing all that jazz, as well as, frankly, our sponsors, BCW Supplies and Kayfabe Cards. You guys rock sauce. Don't forget you're not losing if you're learning, so keep playing. We'll catch you next time on Instant Speed. Bye-bye.
Well,